Chapter 6. Shadows and Allies. Azural led the way out of the grove of echoes, her steps quicker, steadier, driven by the fire that now thrummed through her like a heartbeat. The grove's heavy silence gave way to the restless murmur of the forest, yet she felt no relief, only a quiet urgency that burned with the same intensity as her anger. The visions had left her shaken, but the clarity they offered made her purpose unmistakable. Vieuva, the name lingered, a promise of vengeance. Talvar kept close, his eyes scanning the forest with wary focus, his hand never far from his sword. Soraya trailed behind, her gaze thoughtful and unreadable. Despite her new resolve, Azural couldn't shake her distrust of Soraya. The woman seemed as much a part of the shadows as the grove itself, but her guidance had been more help than harm, so far. After an hour of silent travel, Talvar finally spoke, his voice low and wary. "What exactly do you remember about this, Vieuva?" he asked, his gaze flickering between the forest's shadows and Azural. "You've spoken of him like a curse." Azural's fists clenched, her eyes flashing with an inner fire. "Not enough to tell you everything," she replied, her tone edged with frustration. "I remember his face, a face that promised only death. He's the reason I am. Whatever this is." She glanced at her hands, feeling the heat simmering just below her skin, as much a part of her as her breath. "He is power and shadow, a master of something dark, and he made sure I would remember him. I know he seeks control over the flames within me, even if it means destroying me." Talvar nodded slowly, his face grim. "So this isn't just personal. He's a threat beyond you." "It's very personal," Azural replied, her voice laced with a fury that surprised even her. "He robbed me of something, left me in ashes, made me something broken." She shook her head, the anger hardening her resolve. "But I will reclaim what I lost. I'll find him, and I'll burn away every shadow he hides behind." Soraya's gaze shifted, an unreadable expression flickering across her face. "If you wish to destroy him, you'll need more than fire, Azural. He has woven himself into the very fabric of this land's darkness, and he is not without his allies. His power is cunning, subtle, like poison. You must be prepared for that, or he will use your own fire against you." Azural's lips pressed into a hard line, but she nodded. "Then tell me what I need to know to fight him. I didn't come back to be anyone's pawn." Soraya's expression softened, her voice quiet. "You're right to be wary, and you're right to seek him out. But know this, Vieuva is patient. He waits in shadow, letting others do his bidding until the time is right. We'll find him eventually, but you'll have to understand your own power first. And for that, we'll need allies." Talvar raised an eyebrow, his gaze skeptical. "You're saying this Vieuva has followers, and you want us to do the same? I doubt the average mercenary or rogue knight will stand against dark magic willingly." Soraya's gaze was steady. "Not everyone is willing to follow a creature of flame or a knight disgraced. But there are those who seek vengeance, or justice, or simply survival. Those people can be powerful allies if we can find them. Vieuva's corruption spreads wide. There are many who would oppose him if they knew the truth." Azural's jaw clenched. She didn't want to depend on others. She wanted to march straight to the heart of Vieuva's dark domain and burn it to ash. But Soraya's words weighed heavily on her. They were, perhaps, the caution she needed. As they walked, the forest shifted subtly around them, the shadows thickening, the air growing colder. Talvar stopped suddenly, his hand rising to signal silence. Azural felt it too, something foreign, a presence slipping between the trees, as if the forest itself were holding its breath. "Stay alert," Talvar whispered, his eyes fixed on the darkness beyond them. "We're not alone." The forest fell silent, and then a sound cut through it, a low, rumbling growl that seemed to come from all directions at once. The shadows shifted, and from them emerged figures cloaked in dark armor, their faces obscured by helms carved with twisted designs. Each bore the same insignia, a sun split by shadow, the mark of Vieuva's followers. The leader, a towering figure with a blackened sword in hand, stepped forward, his voice a low, mocking rasp. So, the Draconis Ignis Aeterni rises from the ashes after all. I wondered if the stories were true. Azural's fists clenched, the fire sparking at her fingertips. If you know who I am, you know this is your last chance to leave. The leader's laugh was cold, hollow. Bold words from a creature who barely controls her own flames. Vieuva will be pleased to know you've wandered straight into his grasp. Talvar's hand was on his sword, his stance tense. If you serve Vieuva, you serve a liar and a coward. You won't live long enough to regret that mistake. The dark figure sneered, his blade glinting as he raised it. We'll see who lives. In an instant they charged, weapons flashing in the dim light. Azural felt the heat rise in her veins, her fire surging to life as she met the first attacker with a blast of blue flames that seared through his armor. The flames crackled, hungry and fierce, and she felt the thrill of it, of power finally unleashed. Beside her, Talvar's sword danced, each strike precise and deadly, his movements fluid and fierce. He fought with an intensity she hadn't yet seen, his focus unwavering. For a moment, Azural glimpsed the knight he had once been, his strikes purposeful and exact, cutting down enemies with an almost graceful savagery. But there were more of Vieuva's followers than she had expected. They poured from the shadows, relentless, their dark armor glinting as they closed in around her. Azural struck out again, flames scorching the earth, consuming 2 more attackers in searing light. Yet she felt the strain of each strike, the fire pulling on her strength, pushing her to the edge of control. The leader advanced, his eyes gleaming with dark amusement as he deflected her flames with ease. "Your power is nothing more than a parlor trick," he taunted, his voice mocking. "Vieuva will consume you like he did before, fire and all." The word struck her like a blow, sending a shock of cold dread through her. Her fire faltered, and the leader lunged, his sword arcing toward her with deadly precision. Azural stumbled back, bracing herself, but before he could strike, Talvar's sword flashed, intercepting the blow. The leader hissed, his sneer twisting into a snarl as he pushed against Talvar's blade, their weapons locked. "You're nothing but a traitor, a fallen knight clinging to shadows," he spat. Talvar's gaze was steely, his voice low. "Better a fallen knight than a servant to a coward." With a swift movement, he twisted his blade, sending the leader reeling back. Azural gathered herself, feeling the fire coil within her, her vision sharpening as anger surged through her. She was no one's pawn, no one's puppet to be consumed. She let the fire rise, feeding on her fury. And with a shout, she unleashed a torrent of blue flames that engulfed the leader, his scream swallowed by the roar of fire. The other followers hesitated, their confidence faltering. Azural seized the moment, flames licking at her hands as she advanced. "Tell your master that his shadows won't save him," she said, her voice low and fierce. "Tell him I am coming for him." With one last glance, the remaining followers retreated, their shadows slipping back into the darkness. Azural watched them go, her pulse racing, the fire within her still surging like a storm she had barely contained. She forced herself to let it go, feeling the heat fade from her hands, her breath ragged. Talvar sheathed his sword, his face grim. "Vieuva knows you're coming now. We won't be able to travel unnoticed any longer." Soraya stepped forward, her gaze unreadable. "You've sent a message, Azural, but be wary. Vieuva thrives in fear and thrives on it. He will twist that message against you if given the chance." Azural met her gaze, her resolve unbroken. "Then let him come," she replied, her voice a fierce whisper. "I'm done hiding. If he seeks to trap me, he'll find himself facing the fire he tried to control." Talvar glanced at her, his eyes filled with something close to respect. "You fight well, Azural, but Soraya is right. Vieuva is not like these lackeys he sends after you. He will wait, and he will watch for weakness." Azural clenched her fists, her jaw tightening, She could feel it. The weight of Vieuva's shadow creeping ever closer, the memories of her vision still fresh in her mind, but she would not falter. Not now. Soraya touched her shoulder gently, her gaze filled with a quiet resolve. There are others who will stand against Vieuva, Azural. Seek them, and you may find strength in their numbers. We will not win this fight alone. Azural took a deep breath, her fire simmering with a fierce, unyielding purpose. Then we find them, she said, her voice strong, unshaken. And together we will face whatever shadows Vieuva sends. I will not fall again, not until his darkness is nothing but ash. The three of them stood in the clearing, their alliance unsteady yet bound by purpose. The shadows of Vieuva's reach loomed ahead, but Azural's fire burned brighter than ever, tempered by her resolve. They would face what came, and they would rise against it. As they turned to leave, a gust of cold wind swept through the trees, carrying with it a whisper that only Azural seemed to hear, a voice, faint and mocking, that sent a chill through her veins. "You are still mine, Draconis Ignis Aeterni," the whisper promised, dark and haunting, "and I will see you fall."